React not too long ago. Well, it was on React Native. Today I'm going to be giving one on React on Rails. So this is a JavaScript meetup. This is not a Ruby or a Rails meetup, so I'm not going to assume any familiarity with Ruby or Rails. So in a nutshell, what Ruby on Rails is a server-side web application framework that's written in Ruby. So the Ruby programming language is super easy to learn. It's a good first language. It's similar to Python. It's object-oriented. It has very rich libraries. It's open source, and it's easy to extend. So Ruby on Rails, it allows you to configure your code with database schema, and it allows you to use meta-programming techniques. Ruby on Rails is an MVC framework. Now, MVC on the front end is completely different from MVC on the back end. So in a default configuration in Rails, a model is going to map to a table in a database and a Ruby file. A controller is a server-side component that's going to respond to external requests from the server to the application. And a view is just an ERB file, which is then converted to HTML at runtime. So the problem is, with Rails views, they can only take you so far. When you have plain ERB views, that might be enough in the beginning, and you might be able to use jQuery for the first few dynamic features, but after a while, your code is going to become super unmaintainable and hard to understand. Some of the functionality is going to be on the responsibility of the back end. Other things are going to be happening on the front end, and there's no longer going to be one single place where you can read and understand your code. And that's where React comes in. So JavaScript is a great language for client-side coding. I'm sure you all agree with me. It's much better than Ruby because of the asynchronous nature of UI. So there are many high-level benefits to it. For example, it leverages the virtual DOM for performance. It promotes componentized development, and it has just a view layer, which helps make everything more modular. So I think most of the talks given today are going to be about React, so I'm not going to do an intro to React. Now, when you compare React to other frameworks like Angular, it's not fair because they're full MVC, but that's where Flux comes in. So Flux is more of a pattern than a framework, but it allows for unidirectional data flow. It has three parts: the dispatcher, stores, and views. So there are three different ways that you can use React with Ruby. The first, which is probably the simplest way, is to just use the React Rails gem. And the code organization is very much the Rails way, if you like that. It uses the default Rails asset management, and it automatically transforms Rails into the asset pipeline using a Babel transpiler. See, the problem is if you want to integrate something like React Router or Redux, that can be a concern. So the second way, another super popular gem for this is called React on Rails. And what's neat is it uses ES6 by default, and it has all these cool JavaScript tools like Webpack, and you don't have to rely on the asset pipeline. It also doesn't depend on jQuery. And instead of using the Rails asset pipeline to compile ES6, you only really use it for including the JavaScript that Webpack compiles. So you use npm to install all these JavaScript libraries instead of having to use gems or having to manually download and include all of them. And that gives you a lot more power, but at the cost of having to download and install all these extra things. So the last way that you can use React with Rails is to do a Rails API with a separate front-end React app. So that would be using Node and Express. So this would involve separating the back end and the front end into two separate apps. So the back end can be either a standard Rails app exposing some API endpoints with JSON, or it can be a Rails API on the app. So the front end would then be an Express app that's running on Node.js, which uses React and then talks to the React API. Sorry. It's a lot more work, though, to have to build and run and maintain these two separate apps, but there are benefits to it. For example, if you want to build other clients like mobile apps, that's where something like this would come in handy. Also, a Node app, it's the natural environment for JavaScript. for a JavaScript library like React, so you're probably going to be more productive. And also, server-side rendering of the components is also faster. That's okay, this is my last slide, and then that's my contact info in case anyone has any questions later. All right, thank you.